It's the Jersey Blitz, NJ.com's high school football podcast. Hello, Jersey football fans. I'm Dan Long, and on today's episode, I'll be joined by all 6 of our NJ.com football beat writers: Donovan Hugel, Ryan Patty, Joe Zadalis, Mike Kinney, Kevin Minnick, and Bill Evans, as we'll be previewing all of the public and non-public state semifinals this weekend on the show. So, as we get things going here, I'll bring in Donovan Hugel and Ryan Patty as guys we want to talk about the state semifinals in non-public A. And Donovan, starting off, it's a rematch that everyone was really hoping for, but we're kind of surprised to get in the semifinals. Bergen Catholic, Don Bosco Prep. You covered Don Bosco Prep. They did everything they needed to get done in that first meeting back in late September. Do they have to use the same strategy this time around, or is Bergen Catholic, you feeling like going to be ready for it? What does Bosco see in this matchup?
Yeah, Dan, that's a great point. And I was going to talk about like the one question that I've kind of been primarily asking myself heading into this game is, will a similar game plan for Bosco, like will Bosco use a similar game plan to beat Bergen this time around, and will it work this time around? Because we saw that last time. It was pretty low scoring. Defense played really, really well. And, to break it down further, to break that question down further, those were kind of the best aspects that Bosco displayed in that win over Bergen. They played a clean game on offense. Defense came up with a lot of big stops, and then they killed clock late to deny Bergen any chance of that comeback. And how much of that can they replicate again? We saw that a lot in the quarterfinal win, the 42-7 win over Seton Hall Prep, and not much to say about that one. Defense was dominant. Offense, they got contributions from several different players. Special teams made a couple of big plays with a block kick and a touchdown, but all due respect to Seton Hall Prep, I think we were expecting that score to look the way that it was in that quarterfinal game. So, yeah, I mean, none of that, I feel like we can't really take a lot away from that quarterfinal game, and it's really about, what Bosco has done since they beat Bergen the last time. And it was, we know that the defense can kind of play up to that level that they did against Bergen because we've seen it week after week. We know that they're capable of going on long drives and converting on third downs because of Carson Shane's ability to manage the offense really well, and also the offensive line's ability to kind of push forward and create holes for Dante DeLuca and Kasai Thomas. But can they play clean again against a Bergen defense that I'm sure will try to turn the heat up against Shane? And Ryan, what do you think? Because on paper I see a Bosco team that has remained incredibly consistent throughout the regular season and taking care of business against the teams that it needs to. But do you think Bergen is going to be game planning? What do you think Bergen is going to be game planning for second time around?
Yeah, the key for Bergen here defensively, at least defensively, is obviously to stop the run. You mentioned it, Dante DeLuca. I think Bergen really showed some signs of improvement last week against St. Joe's Metuchen. I saw a lot of physicality, some hard hits. I think their defense, and really, after that loss to St. Joe's Montvale, where they lost in overtime, where the defense gave up some big plays, I think they might be starting to turn a corner a little bit. And Coach Campanelli, I talked to him earlier in the week, and he told me his team got punched in the mouth in the regular season against Bosco, specifically on that last defensive possession where Bosco pretty much ran out like 6-7 minutes of clock there in the fourth quarter. And there's nothing that Vito hates more than getting out-muscled and outworked. So I think you're going to see a Bergen Catholic defense kind of respond with more energy than they've had in recent weeks. And offensively, I think the key for Bergen is how well they can protect Trey Taliaferri, because all of a sudden, Bergen's become a team that can throw the ball all over the yard. Calhoun and Kane are kind of going to be, they're always going to be the focal point of the offense, but Taliaferri has 28 touchdowns to just one pick. And, him and the receivers have just become lethal. The O-line play is going to be pretty crucial. We know how good Bosco's front seven is. It's one of the best front sevens in the state, might be the best. And they did a number on them up front in that first matchup. And I think even to a degree, St. Joe's Montvale did as well in that first half. Taliaferri was under pressure a lot of QB hits, a lot of QB hurries, a lot of incomplete passes in that first half. So I think you're going to see Bosco maybe look at that tape, try to exploit some of those things. But ultimately, this game's all about tackling, blocking, intensity, all the basic, fundamental stuff, the basic coach speak stuff that wins in high school football. Because these teams know each other so well. They know all about each other's X's and O's, all the tricks up their sleeves. So I think you're going to see a very, the team that executes most is going to win this game.
And guys, the other semifinal in non-public A, St. Joe's traveling to Jersey City to take on St. Peter's Prep. Obviously, the winner of this one will have a date at MetLife Stadium with the winner of Bergen versus Bosco. Rematch of a regular season matchup that St. Peter's Prep won with a winning 2-point conversion, 1-1, but it's a completely different game here with Nate Bailey being in the mix. What do you guys see with that matchup of St. Joe's and St. Peter's Prep?
Yeah, Dan, I think that is the biggest takeaway for me going into this one is this St. Joe's offense is going to look completely different on paper and on the field, not only with Nate Bailey back in the lineup, and he's been back in the starting lineup for several weeks now, kind of cooking defenses game after game, but really the big thing for me is Lamar Best being under center, and that's no fade to Mason Geis. Mason Geis played phenomenally in his stint as a starting quarterback for Joe's, but anytime you can get your starting quarterback back under center, I think that's going to be a major boost to your offense and your major boost to your game plan. A lot of Joe's offense the last time they played Peters centered on the run game, and for understandable reasons. It was Geis' first start of the year. Nate Bailey was out, and Keyshawn Bryant was terrific. He had 4 touchdowns in that game. The pass game element, though, was completely missing, and specifically that deep ball was completely missing, and that just changes the way that defense's game plan for offense. And we've seen, Lamar Best and Nate Bailey connect on countless of those the last few seasons. And, now that element of their offense is back, and, we know that Peters has had trouble defending against the likes of teams like Bergen and Bosco, and even gave up 28 last time to Joe's without Lamar Best and Nate Bailey. I don't really see a way that Peters can defend them in this game. Like, Ryan, do you think Peters can defend them with those two back in the lineup full health?
It's going to be a lot tougher, I'll say that. But I think if you're St. Peter's, you could feel really good about where you stand going into this game. I mean, this is kind of the moment you've waited for. We said that, when this game happened during the regular season, but we're in the postseason now. Like, you built this thing up slowly over the last couple of years. This is the game that you're waiting for. You have all these guys as seniors now. They went through the trials and tribulations as sophomores, juniors. And I've said it before, and you kind of touched on it. Like, I think at full strength, Bosco, Bergen, Joe's, all these teams are just a notch above St. Peter's. But that doesn't mean that St. Peter's can't beat St. Joe's on Friday for a second time this year. And we've talked, all year about the playmakers that they have on offense. Tyler Barksdale, Abdul Toure, those two make up a great backfield. It's a backfield that could take over a game. And Tyler Bell, dual threat kid, he's thrown 15 touchdowns to Hunter Watson, and that's one of the better connections in the state. I mean, find me a connection there that's hooked up more than 15 times this season. And Amari Jones, Chris Horn, Hudson Pritchard, really good receivers there alongside Watson. There's no shortage of talent here for St. Peter's offensively, but they're going to, have to find holes in what's been a really, really good St. Joe's defense over the last couple of weeks. They're going to have to find massive breakdowns, kind of like what Bergen did in the second half against them. They're going to have to create some turnovers, but you mentioned it. I mean, it's got to be the defense here finding ways to make some plays, because if not, it's going to be another shootout, kind of like it was at Caven Point in the regular season. Because, when St. Joe's is executing offensively and doing things, you mentioned Lamar Best, he's healthy now. All of a sudden, it's a miracle thing with his shoulder. He's throwing a lot of passes now. He hasn't been able to throw the ball at all. And Nate Bailey's healthy now. So we're going to see. I mean, it might have to be a shootout. Maybe St. Peter's finds ways to play defense, but regardless, it's going to have to take a really good game from these seniors, these guys that have been building up for this moment for a couple of years now.
Those are the state semifinals in non-public A, and now we shift to non-public B and bring on Kevin Minnick to talk about Holy Spirit now getting a chance to possibly knock off the defending champs in non-public B as they'll travel up to Alps Road in Wayne to take on DePaul Catholic. And Kevin, what do you see from Holy Spirit that can leave those fans believing, hey, this can be an upset and bring Holy Spirit back to a state championship final?
And it begins and ends with the quarterback. Ty Costabile has done an outstanding job for them throughout his career, and he's really developed into one of the better quarterbacks in South Jersey, if not in the state. He leads them last week on a game-winning drive in the final minutes to knock off Donovan Catholic, and has really been the heart and soul of this team. They've been more of a pass-oriented squad this year, and obviously that starts with Ty. And he's the all-time leading passer in school history. This year he's thrown for over 2,000 yards and 28 touchdowns. He's done it all year, and basically what it's going to come down to is he's going to need to do it again. So the defense is going to have to really hold up their end of the bargain and limit DePaul in the amount of big plays it generates offensively, and they're going to have to give Ty and the offensive chance. And if they can be in the game in the fourth quarter, obviously be within a score and have the ball late, Ty has shown time and time again that he can lead this team down the field and, put it in, put a W in the books or get itself extremely close. So this is the same place they were at last year, same team, just a different year. They got routed out last year. Last year, I believe it was 41-7, somewhere in that neighborhood. I think a year more experience under their belt. I don't think the big game atmosphere is going to bother them. There's enough kids on this team that have that playoff experience, knew what it was like last year to go up there, knew what it felt like to lose and come home with that feeling in their stomach. So, you really in high school football, you don't want to put everything on the shoulders of one player because obviously it takes more than one to win. But if Holy Spirit is going to have any chance to win the game, it begins and ends with the quarterback, and Ty Costabile is the guy.
Ryan, while DePaul has not been as dominant as they were last season when they only lost once, and that was that 1-point defeat in a wild shootout against Del Barton, this is still the team to beat in non-public B, and they want to show that they have the goods and have been battle-hardened by their very difficult regular season schedule.
You love that Del Barton DePaul game from last year, Dan. You love it.
I didn't even get a chance to broadcast it, but 52-51 is just insane.
That was an awesome game. But yeah, no, it's a different DePaul team from last year. It's a team that is really focused on how it's playing on defense. And their defense is going to have to be at its top level this week. They have 5 defensive touchdowns this season. A lot of guys in the front 7 who can create turnovers, create sacks, tackles for loss. Coach Campanelli told me that he likes that they played Holy Spirit last year. He got to learn about them and how much they throw the ball. He thinks that, he's done a little bit of math. He thinks they throw the ball on 80% of their possessions, or 80% of their snaps, excuse me. So I think that DePaul has things figured out defensively. I think they'll have the right game plan. To me, DePaul's offense needs to put together a game for 4 quarters. Marquand Carter, he leads the backfield, and Mason James is Derek Zambit's go-to guy out of the receiving core. But this offense is at its best when the ball is being spread around, when everyone's getting a bite at the apple. Colin Woodle, he scored last week, and he filled in for Sean Nevers, who's had an injury. He's kind of the change of pace back for Marquand Carter, and we'll see if Nevers is healthy this week. But guys like Woodle stepping up and making plays. A.J. Larkin, he's getting involved in the run game and short pass game. You have guys like Kyron Dubose, Ryan Thomas. Those are 2 field stretchers for them. Michael Knox, he's a big body tight end. So there's a lot of guys with different skill sets that can do damage here for DePaul. And obviously Zammit can make plays with his legs. But I think ultimately the defense is what this team is oriented on now. But the offense is going to have to kind of build on what they did against Vianney. I mean, Coach Campanelli wasn't over the moon about how they played, but a 21-point win, a lot of guys touching the ball. I think that's something to build on. If they can build on that, spread the ball around and stuff like that, and play a clean game with no turnovers, I think they're in a good spot on Friday.
The other semifinal in non-public B, Red Band Catholic taking on Paramus Catholic in Paramus. Joe Zadalis, when we saw this identical matchup in the regular season, RBC had asserted themselves as the team in the Shore Conference. They were coming off a win that the 2 of us were witness to at Rumson Fairhaven, but then they got humbled by the Paladins. Is there a way that the Caseys can get past PC and get back to MetLife Stadium?
I think so, Dan. I really like their chances in this game. RBC will carry a 4-game winning streak into Friday night. RBC overpowered Paula 6 in the quarters last week, 36-0. In 3 state playoff games, Dan, RBC has won by a combined score of 118-0. They haven't allowed a point in 14 straight quarters. Now, the difference in the game back in October was the fact that Paramus outscored RBC 15-9 in the second half. Paramus forced RBC to settle for 3 field goals instead of touchdowns. Now, if RBC can finish those drives, Dan, even me not being a math major, RBC has a really good chance to win that game. And, if you look back at the numbers from the first time they played, RBC's freshman running back Gabe Kemp ran for 132, and RBC had 287 as a team. So it's not like they were shut down. I think RBC defense is going to be better. I think they probably learned from that. I know PC's 63 points last year put the RBC defensive coaches at DEFCON 1, but I think you're going to see RBC be better at the line of scrimmage, try and pressure Rowan and Martin and not let them just stand on Rowan and Martin, not let Rowan Martin, stand back there without pressure. To me, in this game, the key player for RBC is freshman quarterback Ramiro Rivera. I expect PC to sell out and try and stop Gabe Kemp. So that to me means that Rivera is going to have to make some early throws, get some early completions. They don't need to be bombs, Dan. They just need to be enough to force the PC safeties to stay back and not approach the line of scrimmage. Rivera threw one of his few interceptions in that game, but I'm hoping that, he's not shy about this game and making a mistake. To me, he's got to let it rip. He needs to feel the rush and flee the pocket when necessary. He's played with ice water in his veins all year. Let's hope he can do it one more time, Dan.
And Ryan, here's the opportunity for Greg Russo to bring his alma mater to a state championship appearance if he can get past RBC. What do you see from the Paladins in this semi?
Yeah, the way I see this game, Dan, and I think it's really been PC's game plan the whole year. They're going to try to outscore you. They have really good players on defense individually in some spots, but their best athletes play most of their snaps on offense. And, Greg Russo, he's an offensive guy. He's got the play sheet in his hand, and he's very good at his job. Like Joe mentioned, I think they're going to ride the hot hand with Rowan Martin. Marco Green's healthier now, but I think, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And Rowan Martin's been very good for them, the sophomore, who replaced Green in the middle of the season due to his injury. And, we've talked about the playmakers on this team offensively. Chukuma Odo, he's a bruising between the tackles back, and then you have Achilles DuPont. He's a twitchy kid, a pass catcher, very fast kid, and two different kind of backs that they'll put them out there in pony sets, stuff like that, and they'll really give defenses fits where you don't know who's getting the ball. It could be DuPont out of the backfield on a swing pass. They really mix stuff up, and it's all Coach Russo. Like I said, he's the one holding the play sheet, and they have guys who can take the top off the defense at the receiver position. It's Nakai Martin. He can score from anywhere on the field. He's near the top of the state's list in receiving yards. AJ Lopez, he's a stud sophomore. He can stretch the field. Aiden Acevedo, Julian Franco. There's a lot of pass catchers for them, a lot of weapons for this offense that RBC has to game plan for. And Coach Russo, like Coach Nick Campanelli, he loves that he got to play Holy Spirit last year. Coach Russo loves that he got to play RBC earlier this year. He learned a lot about them. He thinks that it was good that he got them in some 3rd and 8s. The short conference, it's not, a slouch conference, but it's not, the big North up here. So he likes that he got to see RBC in some interesting situations, situations they hadn't really been in earlier this year against their short conference schedule. And ultimately, Coach Russo feels really good about where his team's at right now.
So that's a look at the 2 different non-public groups with all of their semifinals. Going to be interesting stuff as the winners will then head on to MetLife Stadium next Friday. Now we take a look at the public school state semifinals, and we're going to be starting with South Central in Group 1, Burlington City versus Glassboro. Bill Evans, take it away. What do you see with this matchup in the semis in Group 1?
Yeah, we've kind of been waiting for this matchup pretty much for the last couple months. Glassboro, as talented as they are, and maybe a tradition-rich program might be their best team ever. They're going to make a case for that over the next 2 weeks. But as we've talked about, they've played a relatively soft schedule. They did beat Haddonfield week 1 at the Battle of the Beach, and Haddonfield obviously is going on to win a Group 2 sectional title. That has proven to be a very good win. But beyond that, there's only been one other team on their schedule with a winning record, which was Salem, who's 6-5. Salem's a very good defensive team, but it kind of lacked the offensive firepower to really give Glassboro a test. So, I mean, this Burlington City team, we've noticed from the beginning of the year, playing a tougher schedule, playing some bigger schools, that we've kind of felt like they were the team that could give Glassboro a test. And now that this Friday night, we're going to find out. They have a 2,000-yard rusher in Dante Davis. Obviously Glassboro's going to be trying to stop him. BC can throw the ball a little bit. Last week against Shore, which was a very tough matchup. They won 28-20. They really didn't do that much. They only completed 2 passes for 23 yards. So they're going to need to be a lot more balanced if they're planning to beat Glassboro. Davis is obviously going to have a good day, but they're going to need to be balanced as well. And they're going to have to make some plays like they did last week. Malachi Sadler had an interception and a punt return for a touchdown. Plays like that are what's going to enable them to get the upset here. And then we'll see if this is a team that can take Glassboro into the fourth quarter. Shalleck was up 7-6 very late in the first half, and then in a blink of an eye, Glassboro scores 2 touchdowns right before the half, and it's 19-7. That's what they're capable of doing. Can this be the team that takes them all the way, puts a little pressure on them that we haven't seen them have to deal with this year? I think obviously those guys on Glassboro's defense, like Brandon Simmons and Tasheen Butler, are going to be the keys. And then, obviously somebody on offense last week was Amari Saab, but it could just as easily be Xavier Saab or Makai Parker. They definitely have some weapons there. I think this is, could be the Group 1 state championship. I mean, there's some obviously decent teams in that North game that we're going to hear about in a minute, but I think these might be the 2 best teams in Group 1. And if there's anybody that can give Glassboro a run for their money, I think it could be Burlington City.
Now, referencing that other semifinal in Group 1 up north, it's a rematch of last year's semifinal, Cedar Grove taking on Butler. And Mike Kinney, Cedar Grove, once again, despite graduating all of those unbelievable offensive catalysts from a season ago, they found their way into a sectional championship, and now they're 1 win away from getting back to the Group 1 state final.
Yeah, Dan, and they did so. They did so with a lot of ingenuity. They did so with a lot of discipline and practice, and they did so with the kids from last year who were not starters, learning from the kids who got them to that position last year. Now, one of the things that Coach Rob Gorgity has been stressing to his guys, and I don't think he even has to at this point, is that, guys, I know we beat Butler 52 to 21 last year. This is not this. We're not the same guys we were last year. If you don't recall, we don't have Jackson Maurice anymore. We don't have Stephen Paradiso anymore. We don't have Nick Russo anymore. So we have to do what we can with what we've got. So I think they're stressing that this is going to be a much harder game. Butler's a better team than they were last year, and Cedar Grove is not quite the same team. However, what I love about Cedar Grove is I love the way they've been playing defense, timely defense, creating turnovers, creating field position for the offense. And the offense has just been absolutely fantastic, creative, imaginative, fearless. Those are the words I think of when I think of this offense. They showed it last week in their game against New Providence. New Providence, a very tough team, very physical team. Cedar Grove opened the scoring with an option pass, an option pass from the end, and they finished their scoring with a double pass. And you talk to Coach Gogarty about it, and he says, hey, our objective is to score points. I don't care how we do it. We work on all these things all the time. They're not trick plays. They're not gimmick plays. These kinds of things are written within their offense because the kids have fun. They use their imagination, and they keep defenses off balance. That's what they're going to have to do against Butler. They're going to have to keep that defense off balance, and I believe they can with Thomas Canatero running the ball and Michael Centarelli, and of course with the quarterback Pierce Ausfausch, who's done a tremendous job of pretending that he is Stephen Paradiso. So Cedar Grove comes in as the team that got to the final last year. They've got to be on their game against Butler, and I think they can be based on what I saw against New Providence.
Ryan, and we're talking about the NJIC champions in Butler. I've seen them twice in person. This is a team that feels like they have unfinished business. They want to make history, make their first appearance in the Group 1 state final. Do they have what it takes to get past Cedar Grove to maybe get that shot at either Burlington City or Glassboro?
Yeah, I got to say, I agree with Bill in that I think the two teams in the South there, Glassboro and Burlington City, are probably the best two in Group 1, but that doesn't take away from the, excitement of this game. I think this is going to be a really good game. I think Cedar Grove's strength of schedule and recent stretch of games has them very ready for this, but, Butler's playing a brand of football right now that I think it bodes pretty well for them in this game. Senior quarterback, David Smith, he's kind of being used like a running back. He's had over 200 yards in all three of the team's playoff games, and he went for over 300 against New Milford in the sectional semis. And that's kind of perfect, right? Because that's what you need to do here against Cedar Grove. This is a high-powered Cedar Grove offense. You want to keep that offense off the field. You don't want to trade scores, and you want a rested defense, and you want to dominate the time of possession. So I'm looking for Smith kind of to make headway in this game. I'm also looking for senior running back Yadi Perez to potentially get a little more involved. I think you're going to see, Cedar Grove really game plan for Smith. So I'm wondering if Butler kind of counters with a little more Yadi Perez, and maybe he ends up having the ball in his hands a little bit more. So I think it's ultimately going to be the run game here for Butler and the short passing game that gives them a shot to avenge, a Group 1 semifinal last year that it wasn't pretty. I mean, 52-21. This one was very lopsided last year, and it's two different teams. Butler returned a lot from last year's team, but you mentioned, getting revenge. They have a lot of work to do that, but I think it has to start with the run game and the short passing game. They got to control the clock. They got to execute offensively.
So now we move to Group 2, and the first semifinal that we're going to look at is Camden at Haddonfield. And Bill, this is a fascinating matchup again, seeing Camden take on a Haddonfield team that you said tested themselves early on against Glassboro and are now starting to play their best football, getting into that championship groove.
Yeah, this is a matchup that we saw a couple times a few years ago, and Haddonfield would tended to beat Camden every time, and they were all there were always big games coming in, and Haddonfield would always find a way. Now we're a few years later. Rob Hinson is now coaching at Camden, his alma mater. They've had a lot of success under him in the last 4 years, and as we've talked about, Haddonfield is traditionally one of the best postseason teams out there. A few weeks ago, Haddonfield's playing Willingboro in double overtime, and Willingboro had just missed a kick that would have won the game. Otherwise, we're not here. But since then, the Bulldogs have kind of picked it up and are starting to get into that postseason groove like they always have. One thing that's really interesting for Haddonfield, Brody Leonard, their running back, has really just kind of taken off in the playoffs. He's had 588 yards, 8 touchdowns in three playoff games. It's about what he had during the whole entire regular season. Usually with Haddonfield, you don't see anybody having a huge statistical game or statistical season. For him to come out last week and then run for 200 yards and 4 scores, or do what he's pretty much done this entire postseason, they don't usually lean on somebody like that. Frank Delano was telling me that the 35 carries he had in the semifinal, he thought was probably the most that any Haddonfield back had since at least 2003. They've decided to give him a heavy dose of the action. Not that they can't attack teams in other ways. Van Lefikis, the quarterback, is a solid quarterback. They do have some other weapons, the Keenan brothers, that they can attack Camden with. But Leonard's been the guy, and it'll be really interesting, I think, to see how much they do lean on him in this instance. On the other side, Camden has really been throwing the ball a lot the last few weeks. Ahmad Jones, again, who transferred from Pleasantville, I don't think threw a touchdown pass his first 4 games for Camden after he became eligible, has 8 in the last 2 weeks. They're really throwing the ball all over the place in the postseason. Again, Ibn Muhammad, Syracuse commit, has been having a couple big games on the outside. They're a team that I think can throw, that would prefer to throw it can run it, or as opposed to Haddonfield would prefer to run it, could throw it. I think whichever team kind of gets to its secondary option more is probably going to win this game. And Camden's been playing some really, really good defense. Last week they had 6 sacks against Wall. Jerome Foster had 2.5 of them. They held Wall to about 80 yards of offense. The week before, Wall had a drive that was longer than that. So, it's going to be tough sledding, I think, for both of these offenses. There's two good defenses. Again, two good coaches with Frank Delano and Rob Hinson. I like everything about this game other than the fact that it's at 7 o'clock. I kind of prefer a 6 o'clock start. Gets a little cold later on in November, but beyond that, I think this is going to be an outstanding matchup this Friday night.
Speaking of outstanding matchups, the other semifinal in Group 2, Shabazz taking on Westwood. Mike Kinney, Shabazz has playmakers all over the field, and they've been challenging themselves with the schedule this year. Is that going to pay off at this point as they take on a very good Westwood side?
Yeah, Dan, I think it absolutely will pay off. And it certainly showed that in the first couple of rounds of the playoffs, their preparedness, their ability to just really get ahead of teams and run away with the games. But that wasn't the case last week against Madison. They confronted a 7-seeded Madison team with a lot of moxie, with a lot of toughness, and a whole lot of answers early for a Shabazz defense that's just been flying to the football all year. And I think that test is going to be maybe more important right now because of where we are in the point of the season than even playing St. Peter's Prep early in the season or Immaculata early in the season or West Orange. I think that game, that their necessity to come back from a deficit, keep their cool, keep their poise, and find ways to win the game. I think that's the biggest thing for Shabazz right now going into this game against Westwood, because they're going to see a better team than they did last week in Westwood, which also is prepared, can execute, and has a lot of experience in postseason. Kareem Costin, the junior quarterback for Shabazz, showed so much discipline and poise, trust in his line, and the ability to wait for his receivers to finish their routes last week to come back from the deficit. It wasn't a big deficit. It was only a touchdown. But Costin, who has really grown this year, threw 3 touchdown passes and showed a lot because Shabazz has been on and off. And one game their passing game is on, one game their running game is on. And last week against Madison in the second half, everything was on. Costin threw the ball so well, and Zayden McDonald and Noah Foxworth ran the ball well. More importantly, the defense shut Madison down in the second half. I mean, Zayden McDonald, he leads that group. He's the safety linebacker going to Stanford. But Adekunle Adeteo putting pressure on the front line along with Nazir Bennett and Devonta Harris. Those guys were tremendous. And McDonald and the other linebackers, Zykeer Best and Assad Reynolds, did a tremendous job of just keeping Madison off the perimeter, stopping them getting the ball back to Shabazz. Those are the keys. That defense and Costin's, what he showed last week, his ability to stay disciplined and trust his people, that's going to be key against Westwood.
And Ryan, Westwood is a team that has tradition, has pedigree, has a great dual threat in terms of a running back and linebacker in Klein. Do they have enough answers, though, on the field to slow down Shabazz and find their way back to a state final in Group 2?
Yeah, I think momentum is going to be big for Westwood here. They look dominant. Again, on Friday, they beat Ramsey for the second time this year by 4 touchdowns, this time in the 32-6 final. And it was more the same for them. Boston College commit. He's the standout running back, linebacker, Steve Klein. It was a lot of him, and it was a lot of Bruno Vega, the sophomore quarterback who I've mentioned a lot on the podcast. And this team is ultimately going to go as far as these two take them. Can they control the clock on Friday? That's probably the biggest question offensively for the Cardinals. And obviously the defenses too. You got to find a way to keep McDonald, Fahim Osborne, Nasir Richardson, all the guys Mike just mentioned. You got to keep them out of the end zone because they've, in a lot of games this year, they've given defenses fits. So those guys are stars, and Westwood's got to find an answer for them. I would say my concern with Westwood going in here would be the strength of schedule. And it's honestly a bit unfair of me to say that because they got Group 3 teams on the schedule. Passaic Valley, Riverdale, Weequahic. They beat up a good, Group 2 team in Ramsey twice. They played Caldwell twice and went 1-1, but there's no Shabazz on their schedule. There's no team with that kind of talent on their schedule. And, like I said, I just named some of those kids Mike mentioned, and, it's just a team that Westwood hasn't played guys like that. they just haven't. And they kind of learned how good they were last year when Shabazz came to town, 14-6 last year in the sectional semis. So I think this is going to be a phenomenal game. I think Westwood's got the guys to keep Shabazz's defense on the field, but it's going to be about Westwood's defense. I think Westwood's got to find a way to defensively play its best game of the year.
So now we move to Group 3 and take a look at the two semifinals coming up this weekend. And for the first one, it's going to be Cedar Creek at Holmdel. Bill Evans, looking at Cedar Creek, we've heard so much and we've talked a lot about Holmdel on the podcast, and we'll have Joe talk about them again. But what does Cedar Creek bring to this semifinal?
Well, this is a program that didn't start until 2011, but just won its fourth sectional title. Again, they've shown that they can handle the pressure of a postseason. They've become a tradition-rich program in quite a short period of time. They beat Mainland on Saturday, and probably one of the best games of the weekend. Mainland was a three-time defending sectional champ. Now that they'd struggled a little bit at times this year, but that was still a team with John Franchini, a four-year starting quarterback, Jay Plum, an all-state receiver, a kicker, and Nate Cashy, who's just set a record for extra points in state history. Had 18 seniors, and they played them in a game that was back and forth the entire way, and came out on top after Cashy kicked a field goal with 33 seconds left to tie the game. Frenchman Bethea rolled out right, hit Giant King with a 65-yard touchdown pass with 21 seconds left to win at 34-28. Bethea is not like many of the Cedar Creek quarterbacks that you've seen in the past. They've been more, drop back passers, timing passers, like to kind of get out, throw a quick slant, throw a screen. Bethea is a lot more mobile. He had over 200 yards passing this game, but also 100 rushing, including a 50-yard run. That's kind of given them another dimension that maybe you're not used to seeing from Cedar Creek. And they have a back in Amir Dunbar, who's around 1,500 yards this year and 4,000 for his career. Didn't have the greatest game this past week, but he's a guy that can definitely put up a big number, over 100 yards or more. And pretty solid on defense too. Justice Payton, a linebacker, is one of the best in the area. They've been in a lot of close games this year. They beat Pleasantville the week before, 15-12 in the playoffs. So they're battle tested. They did stumble late in the year against Ocean City, lost that one in overtime, and that's probably the reason we're playing this game at Holmdel, not Cedar Creek. It hurt their power ranking and forced them to kind of go on the road this week. Still ended up with that sectional title, but this is a good team, and we've thought it was all year. I think they've proven that. One thing very interesting, as good as Holmdel's been, and obviously, teams aren't exactly the same from year to year. But as I mentioned, that Mainland team did bring a lot back from last year's team, and Mainland beat Holmdel last year in the postseason 48-13. So just looking at that should give Cedar Creek an idea that they can hang here. Obviously, it's going to be very tough to challenge a team with Jack Cannon and to hold him down. But I think they can score with him. They're not going to shut them out, obviously. But I think they can play pretty good defense. I think they have enough weapons on offense that they can definitely be in this game and win a high-scoring game. Are they the underdog? Probably so. But there's enough evidence out there that says that that this is a game that they can go up to Holmdel and win.
Joe Zadalis, we talked about Holmdel throughout the course of the entire regular season, then into the postseason. They win a sectional title last week. And when you have Superman leading your offense, you're going to be in every possible game. What can they do with Cannon to get to the state final in Group 3?
I don't think it's a matter of they can do anything. I mean, last week, Dan, Cannon checked off 3 more items off his football bucket list in a 41-20 win over Seneca. He recovered an onside kick. He intercepted his first pass of the season, and he caught a 12-yard pass. And he punts. What's left? A tackle in the end zone for a safety, a sack, kicking a field goal. I just think this has the makings of a great football game. You're looking at a team in Cedar Creek that never says die, and then you have Holmdel, with a quarterback who thinks he can overcome anything and a team playing with massive confidence right now. Um, listen, there were other people who actually scored for Holmdel last week. Anthony Serini had a touchdown run. Matt Scheinman had 2 TDs, one receiving and one running. But it all comes back to number 11, Jack Cannon. He threw a 70-yard touchdown pass in the first quarter. He had a 65-yard run later in the game. But I think what we saw last week was head coach Noel Kavanaugh's ability to not only free up Jack Cannon, as we've talked about all year formationally, but now with teams obviously selling out to stop Cannon, there's going to be other players open and available and making plays. And as I've said all year, to his credit, Jack Cannon elevates the kids around him. He gets the ball to other people. He makes really quick decisions. He goes through his progressions lightning fast. The other thing from the game last week is, the Holmdel defense was much, much better. It allowed only 60 yards on the ground. And while it gave up 190 through the air, it did not allow big plays. Seneca scored on a 1-yard run, a 2-yard run, and an 8-yard run. That means they made Seneca drive the field without making a mistake. And they had to work for every score, which hurt yourself because you're taking time you're going to need to play with Holmdel off the clock. Now, is this the week, the clock strikes midnight for Cinderella Holmdel, or does its fairy god quarterback have a little bit of magic left? I think it's going to be a great football game, and I agree with Bill. I think there are going to be some points scored in this game. I can see, 34-28, something along those lines, Dan.
In the other semifinal in Group 3, we have a matchup of West Morris taking on Old Tappan. And Donovan, West Morris just keeps on chugging along. They've got that opportunity now to knock off Old Tappan and to get back to a state final of their own.
Yeah, I think this is the first game all season where West Morris is going to be an underdog. You could give your case for the Mount Olive game a couple weeks ago, but I'd still say West Morris just based off of pedigree. I was favored in that game, but nonetheless, shout out to the wing T offense. You know what you're getting with this West Morris team. They're going to do the same thing every single week. And, last week against Summit in that North 2 Group 3 sectional final, it was a lot of Deacon Frayne and it was a lot of Mike Finley. And then you also got Brody Mansolino. And, Frayne, a sophomore, has kind of been the lead back of those three. And he had 178 yards last week. But when you combine those three, and mainly those three, along with, some rushes from quarterback Steven Bracchioforte as well, and then other people, but West Morris ran 48 times for 356 yards last week. They completed one pass and it was the only pass they attempted all game for -2 yards. And, that is the type of box score that we've seen from West Morris pretty much all season. And I think it's the type of thing we're going to see again, on Friday night against Old Tappan. And, while Old Tappan is, like we've said, they're the Bergen, they're the Bosco of North Jersey public school football. They're just so consistent and they're always there. I think, the wing T offense is kind of the offense that makes everything so even and it can make games tight no matter who the opponent is. And I think we're going to see that a lot with West Morris on Friday night. And, Ryan talked about it with Westwood. I think the thing that you could dock West Morris for this year is that strength of schedule. Like, they don't have an Old Tappan. Not many teams have an Old Tappan on their schedule. But the toughest team they've played this year was Mount Olive, and that was a 16-13 win. And, regardless of them not having a strength of schedule like Old Tappan's, like they showed in that Mount Olive game, they can persevere in tight games. They can take a lead late in that game. I believe they scored a touchdown and then went for 2 to make it a 3-point game in that one. And then in the last few weeks, they've also done an excellent job of getting out to big leads early and then hanging on that defense. That defense has done a great job of kind of holding down the fort there. So, I think, we're going to see the wing T offense on Friday night against Old Tappan. It's no secret. And I think the wing T offense is going to make this a fantastic game, and West Morris is just excellent at running it.
Ryan, it's Old Tappan and everybody else. That's what it's been the case the last couple of years in Group 3. Do they have something to worry about in this game as they're getting ready for a state semifinal and trying to get back to Rutgers to defend the state championship?
Yeah, before I get into the matchup, they did it again against Wayne Hills. This time they put a running clock on them. It was 42-7 in the third quarter, ended in a 42-14 final on Friday in the North One Group 3 championship. And I've said it before on here, Wayne Hills is a really good team, and Ultapan has pounded them twice. Uh, Zach Maselli's completion percentage this postseason is now at 90.9%. He's completed 40 of 44 passes, and he's spreading the ball around. Leo Eder, Shane Small, Joey Crescitelli, Christakis Nicolo, like they're moving it around. They're giving it to everyone. And they're also playing pretty good defense added this week. But, the element I mentioned last week was special teams, and Cherno St. Paul ran a kick for a touchdown against them. So special teams has to be cleaned up for the Golden Knights. But the other element I'm watching here is the run game, like Donovan mentioned, of West Morris and the size they have. And Coach Brian Dunn and I talked earlier in the week, and he mentioned, like, he said, hey, West Morris is bigger than us. Both sides of the ball, they're bigger than us. And I think if there's any kryptonite for NVOT, it's West Morris. I remember that 2023 game in the sectional final where it was 21-17. West Morris went into Ultapan and won the game. So you wonder if, like, could they be a bit of a boogeyman for Ultapan here in this dynasty run? I mean, they're going for 3 titles in the last 4 years. And NVOT has had some injuries up front on the O-line. They went in with their most healthy unit in a couple weeks last week. All those guys, I think, finished the game. I think we're going to see them again this week. But, I mean, maybe they're not all at 100%. Coach Dunn said that they're not. I mean, they're banged up. Maybe they're not at 100%. But they went in against Ramapo, and they had 5 JV linemen, and they beat Ramapo. So you pretty much throw Brian Dunn any curveball, and he can hit it. But yeah, I mean, this West Morris team, they can run the ball. I like Donovan's point about shortening the game, making it tight with the wing T. You're taking possessions away from Ultapan's offense. So it'll be interesting. But I think if NVOT has those answers up front, I think they're going to move on. I trust them a lot. They've been pretty flawless all season.
Now we look at Group 4, and the first semifinal might be the most star-studded public school semifinal that we'll have this upcoming weekend. Brick Memorial taking on Winslow. Joe Zadalis, Brick Memorial has been able to put up points aplenty throughout the course of the season. The question is going to be in this one, do you think they have enough of the horses to slow down Winslow defensively?
Last week, Brick Memorial recorded its first shutout of the season in a 28-0 win over Middletown North. Middletown North is not Winslow. I think the Mustangs are going to have their hands full. The Brick Memorial defense this week, Dan, goes from being out of the spotlight all season to being under the proverbial microscope this week. I mean, this is a gigantic task they're facing. Winslow has won 22 straight games against public school opponents. In those 22 games, it has scored 893 points, a smidge over 40 per game. And during this domination, it has scored fewer than 26 points only once. I mean, that's monumental. I think the Brick Memorial offense will score in this game. But whatever it is they score, 7, 14, maybe with a couple of breaks, 21, the Brick Memorial defense is going to have to make that stand up against an offense that can beat you, seems like 100 different ways. And Kevin, I'm sure we'll talk about that momentarily. I don't know how Brick Memorial is going to make all those stops. They're going to have to play better at every level than they have this year. Brick has only allowed 28 points, more than 28 points only 3 times. They have allowed 15 or fewer 8 times. In the last 6 games, it has allowed only 42. Now, while Brick Memorial shut off the run last week, Dan, they held Middletown North to 7 yards rushing. They did give up 247 through the air, and this week they're going to be matched against one of the state's most productive quarterbacks. Plus Brick Memorial got beat on deep routes down the middle twice last week. Memorial's going to need to really mix things up. They're going to have to play a lot of man, a lot of zone. They're going to have to show Winslow a lot of looks, and that may mean, run blitzes, pass blitzes, dropping off. In most of its games this year, Brick Memorial has been able to out athlete opponents in the Shore Conference. They're not going to out athlete Winslow this week. Do I think the Mustangs maybe can keep it close for a while? Maybe that's wishful thinking on my part, but Brick Memorial's going to show up and give it their best effort. They have won they're coming off their first title in 17 years, so we'll see what they got.
Kevin, we've been saying this all season long. Winslow is the team to beat in Group 4. Winslow is going to be possibly the best public school team still, despite the gauntlet that they ran. How have they been playing, and what do they look like getting into this state semifinal?
Oh, well, Dan, Winslow is playing its best football right now. Bill Belton likes where they're at on offense. He likes where they're at on defense. They got a kicker. They have all the parts, like we've talked about all season, to complete this run. And they get everybody's best shot. And they've gotten everybody's best shot, and they're still winning games by 3 and 4 touchdowns. They're winning games at halftime. The running clock is coming in. They're not. I can't see them losing this game. I just cannot see them. It would be a monumental upset. But at the same time, they have given up touchdowns. They gave up 2 touchdowns to Millville last week on back-to-back possessions on the same play down the middle of the field for 70-plus touchdowns on both times. So they have had times where you'd look at them and you're like, where did that come from? But then they answer with 35 straight unanswered points. The clock starts running, and it's just another ho-hum Winslow win. It begins with Winslow, with Jalen Parker. He's an all-state quarterback for a reason. He's now just 3 touchdowns short of breaking Devin Leary's state record for career touchdown passes. And Jalen has this week, possibly next week, and then another season, which could be another 14 games. So, he's going to obliterate every state passing record that there probably is when all is said and done. And he does that because he has so many weapons to throw the ball to. And we've talked about that throughout the course of the year, too. Nikir Helton, who's now headed to North Carolina, he has seemingly gotten better each week. He makes the big catch in traffic. He makes the big catch in traffic in the end zone. He goes up and grabs the ball where you're kind of shaking your head. I don't want to say Latsier Brooks-like, but there are times when he comes down with balls that you just don't understand how he caught them. Quade Hendricks the same way. He obviously missed a few games to start the season, but after transferring, but he's settled in to be, if Helton is 1, then Hendricks is 1A. And then, TJ Maddox is a rising sophomore who next year could be the guy. So the weapons are there. Parker has obviously taken advantage of the situation, and defensively they've just been equal to the task. The guys up front are just nasty. The linebackers flow to the ball so fast, and the DBs are just sitting back there waiting and praying that somebody decides to throw the ball because they're quick enough and good enough to go after it themselves. So Joe kind of laid it all out as to what Brick has to do. Winslow just has to, if Winslow plays just the way Winslow has been playing, there is no reason why they're not playing for that gold trophy in 2 weeks.
The other Group 4 state semifinal, Ryan, Ramapo once again found a way to win in that epic rivalry between themselves and Northern Highlands that we were both witness to last weekend. This is a team that can put up some points. This is a team that has a bend but don't break style defense. And they get a rematch and a shot again at the team that ended their season last year in Phillipsurg.
Yeah, you mentioned the game last week. I mean, it really doesn't get better than that. 28-27, a 2-point conversion stop of Chase Calarco. Joey Yesis, went into that pile, ripped the ball out. It was the 8th straight game between the two where it was a 1-score game. It was the 5th win in a row for Ramapo over Highlands. And now they got to turn the page to P-Berg, who beat them on this stage in 2024. I think what Ramapo can hang its hat on now is that it's more physical than it's been in previous years. Phillipsurg loves to run the ball. Sam Deck, they're a really physical team up front. But Ramapo loves to run it too now. Liam Hayward, he's a bruising back. And then Casey Grusser, the dual threat quarterback, has ran the ball at a very high clip this year as well. He was Ramapo's leading rusher last week. I believe he had 171 yards. They have big guys up front, Luke Gerba, Harrison Carney, to name a few. The offensive line for Ramapo doesn't get talked about enough. I mean, these guys are really, really good up front. Both those guys also mix in on the defensive line. And this is a linebacking core from Ramapo that's really stepped up in recent weeks. Jack Snyder, he's got 2 defensive touchdowns. Schneider's an absolute beast. He's only a junior. Then you have Carter Cooney, the senior. He's really stepped up this year. These are lunch pail guys in the front 7. They had to replace a big name in Zach Darwish last year, and they've certainly done that. Gino Georgia has stepped up as well. He's kind of a nickel for them, a safety who plays in the box a little bit. He led the team in tackles last week. He's making waves on defense. So we're going to find out if Ramapo is ready for the physicality test that P-Berg absolutely, I mean, they failed it last year. It was 35-6. They failed the physicality test last year. They played Highlands twice this year. They played Old Tappan, who's smaller but very physical. So you wonder if the strength of schedule this year has Ramapo ready for this moment, because last year they certainly weren't. And, we're going to find out if they're ready for the Maloney Stadium experience this time.
And Mike, we talk about Phillipsburg. We've seen him a couple times on our broadcast airwaves, including in that shutout performance where they got beat up by St. Joe's Metuchen. But since then, the Stateliners have been taking care of business. They know how to run the football and know how to run it well. How do the Stateliners get past Ramapo and maybe get another shot at Winslow in a state final?
Yeah, Dan, I think one of the keys for them, and certainly that's what Frank Duffy said to me, that one of the keys is making sure that you stop Casey Grusser. He complimented on his elusiveness, his ability to play, and Ryan talked about his ability to run. I mean, that has been something that we've seen more recently than ever. His ability to get out of the pocket and run, and that just amplifies his strengths as a quarterback, because we all know he can throw. So he talked about the pressure that they're going to have to put on him, but smart pressure. Aiden Highwell and Elijah Montgomery and Tyler Wargo, they do a great job of setting that pressure on at the line of scrimmage for P-Berg, but they've got to be smart. They can't overcommit with a guy like Grusser. He can get away both with his arm throwing on the run and with the run in general. But P-Berg has done that. P-Berg has done a great job of adjusting defensively and doing that. And the linebackers like Eddie O'Neill and Zion McKern do a tremendous job. P-Berg flies to the football as well as any team that I cover in the Big Central year after year after year. And Coach Duffy talked about that too, taking great swarm angles. The great thing about the P-Berg defense is that you never really know who made the first hit. There's 3 or 4 guys on the ball. They need to do that on every single play. Offensively, I think the real key for P-Berg is, Brian talked about their running game. Their running game is outstanding. Sam Deck running behind the line. McGurn is a great runner too, behind that front line that just works so hard and just is so crisp at engaging and letting Deck and his guys get into the second level. But what they showed last week, they were down only for the second time this year. They trailed in the first quarter against Montgomery. And all of a sudden, we saw Dom Bracco throwing the football a little bit. Now, he was 8 of 10 passing. That's a great percentage. But anyone would say 10 passes, that's not passing. That's not a passing game. It is if it's P-Berg this year, because he averaged about 6 passes a game this year because they feasted on the running game. Well, his showing his ability to catch the receivers through 2 touchdown passes, I think that's absolutely critical for Ramapo to see, to give him that respect that this kid can throw a little bit. We never saw that, and that's going to open up the running for Sam Deck and the other running backs. So I think that's key. If Don Bracco can show again early in the game, hey, I can make some passes here, that's going to open up things for P-Berg's offense.
And now we preview our final group here in the state semifinals as we look at the first semifinal in Group 5 in the southern area, Kingsway, Washington Township. Kevin Minnick, this was a matchup that we were looking forward to once the brackets kind of started to develop as we thought. And Washington Township has that opportunity now to advance to play for a championship. Kingsway is that last opponent that can get in their way before potentially moving on to play at Rutgers University.
Yeah, Dan, these 2 teams played about a month ago. Kingsway looked like they were going to hand Township its first loss, and then Township took advantage of a few things, scored a touchdown in the final couple of minutes, and held on for the W. And Kingsway leaves Tom Brown Field thinking, okay, if we can take care of business and Township takes care of theirs, we're going to play them again. And, a couple of kids had mentioned that, they kind of circled it already, that this was the game that they wanted to happen. They wanted redemption. Well, they're going to get their opportunity this week. Kingsway knocks off Atlantic City, but they come back a little injured to two significant players. Koldenick and Mason Bryan both suffered some injuries that, if they were to even play this week, they would clearly not be 100%. And, Coach Mark Hendricks, explained that to me. He doesn't know if these kids are going to play. Now, we have a couple days left before the game, and everything can change. And, this is where, you didn't get this far to watch. So if there's any chance of these kids playing, they're going to be out there. But obviously not at full strength is going to hurt Kingsway. They're going to need other kids to rise to the occasion and elevate their games even a notch more. They're going to need David Orovitz, the quarterback, to maybe throw the ball a little bit more efficiency. They're going to need a couple of running backs who Koldenick has been the leader all season running the ball. Well, these guys are going to probably get more touches this week, and the defense is going to have to really try to slow down a Township offense that has just been, just rolling in recent weeks. Township comes in this game. They put away Old Bridge without scoring a point, in my opinion, in the first three plays of the game. Sack, tackle for loss, interception. And at that point, in my opinion, it was just a matter of Township scoring and the game was over. They went on to build a pretty big lead before Old Bridge scored a couple little, in quote unquote garbage time and add some stats to make it look a lot closer than it was. But this Township team is playing with boatloads of confidence. These kids have been together like a lot of other teams since they were 4 and 5 years old at the youth level. This Township team was successful then. They've now, like we said in previous weeks, they've taken a step up the ladder with each season, and they really look unbeatable at this point. And it's high school football. And in any stage of football, for that matter, things can change in an instant. But this Township team is just playing with such force and such physicality. Andrew Osborne, I've seen this kid play now. I knew he was good before, but in the last 2 weeks, I've seen this kid he just knocks people over. And Old Bridge had a significant advantage on the offensive line, and Andrew was in the backfield just about every play. So they're getting it done offensively, and they're getting it done defensively. They're going to play at home. The revenge factor is obviously there for Kingsway, but circumstances are a little bit different for both teams now. I expect another really, really good game. I expect both teams to leave it all on the field. But when push comes to shove, I think, I just have this inkling that this is Washington Township's year, and they find a way to win.
And in the other Group 5 semifinal up north, it's going to be Passaic County Tech taking on Bridgewater-Raritan. Ryan, Passaic Tech playing their best football of the season after a couple surprising losses at the beginning of the year. The Bulldogs are playing up to their potential, and they're one win away from getting back to a Group 5 final.
Yeah, I warned everyone about the Gabe Miles-led Bulldogs last week, and they backed up my talk with a 56-42 win over West Orange, and they avenged that Week 1 loss to the Mountaineers, and they did have 2 defensive touchdowns in the game, but Miles, Kadir Young, Ian McDuffie, Tyson Watkins, there's a lot of game changers in this offense, and the 42 points allowed kind of surprised me, but West Orange has a very talented offense, a lot of good skill guys on that team, and Passaic Tech hasn't exactly handled the top flight offense as well this year. They got beat up by Ramapo, and if you go way back to Week 0, they gave up a lot of points to Burlington Township, although I think Burlington Township did have a defensive score in that game. But here's PCTI again. They're back in the state semis for the 3rd time in the last 4 years, and this isn't, the Trayshawn Dye-led Bulldogs where they're running the ball at an unbelievable clip, like 300 yards a game, and playing elite defense and, a lot of sacks, a lot of takeaways. This isn't that kind of team. They called those teams the big boy football teams of 2022 and 2023, but this is still a team that just has a win at all costs mentality. Kadir Young, 171 yards rushing. I mentioned Casey Grusser had 171 yards. It was actually Kadir Young. Grusser, I think, had like 140 or something like that. But Kadir Young, monster running game, one of the better running games up north last week. And the defense may be a bit leaky at times, but they're very opportunistic. Jose Trinidad has a ton of defensive touchdowns this year. This is a team that can run kicks and punts back. I think they've done it a couple times this year. Like I said, this is a team that is win at all costs. They do whatever's necessary to win the close games. I think this is going to be a close game against a Bridgewater team that's very good, as Mike will tell you. But this Passaic Tech team, they're well coached. Matt Demarest does a very good job. It's just a team that when the chips are on the line, they find a way to get it done. They win the games they think they can win, and I think this is going to be one of those games.
And then, as we were mentioning, their opponent, Mike, is Bridgewater-Raritan, a team that, while we have been talking a little bit about them throughout the course of the year, maybe has flown under the radar a bit. Is it time to give them their due here, as they're one win away from advancing to the first ever appearance in a Group 5 state championship game?
Yeah, I don't think no doubt about that. And good reason kind of that they were under the radar, because they were under 500 the last 3 seasons. They really had been struggling to just get anywhere near the 500 mark, to tell you the truth. They were 4-7 last year, so nobody expected anything of them this year. We knew they had some talented kids back, but they had kind of forgotten how to win. I mentioned it last week, and I'm going to mention it again. I hate to overemphasize this, but I talked about a couple of the Division I lacrosse guys that Bridgewater has on its team. Bridgewater is one of the best lacrosse programs in the state of New Jersey. They needed guys to teach the rest of the team how to win again, what it meant. It didn't have to be football. It just had to be competitive. Guys who were in those positions before, in tight situations where they had to perform at their best, they had to play mistake-free ball, and they had to trust each other and depend on one another. And that's what Declan Cardillo, the quarterback, has done. Jack Cifuentes, his top receiver, and Mikey Bradis, his next top receiver. That's what they've done this year. And Cardillo's going to Rutgers to play lacrosse. Cifuentes is going to Air Force to play lacrosse. And Bradis is going to NJIT to play lacrosse. And they all had big roles last week against Bayonne in a come-from-behind win, 21-14. In the last 2 weeks, Bridgewater, we weren't sure about this. They were able to play physical football for the first half against Union City, a team that I think a lot of us thought was more physical than Bridgewater. And then last week against Bayonne, which I know people thought would be more physical than Bridgewater. But they played a little chess. They did what they had to do in the first half. They didn't show a whole lot offensively, but they got it done in the second half. And they got it done with Declan Cardillo. You know, him back at quarterback, he's a kid who just is not going to be rattled. He throws the ball well, but more importantly, he makes great decisions on when to run the ball, and he works with his guys so well. They all trust him. The line trusts him, and those guys can get it done offensively. Of course, Passaic Tech is a big, strong team, and they can pound the football out, and it's all going to be about what the linebacking core like Connor O'Hare and Joey Confalone and Jameer Black can do. And Bridgewater's going to try to establish their running game with Jameer Black and Denzel Amofo. I think they can. And the big thing is just keep it close in the first half against Passaic Tech. And I tell you what, if you go into the second half down a touchdown or around that ballpark, Bridgewater's going to come out with a load of confidence that they can get it done, because that's how they've been playing football the last couple of weeks. And I'm going to say it now, it's going to be the lacrosse guys who take them over the top if that happens.
Incredible stuff by all of our writers here today. And a reminder, fans, that from the opening kickoff to the end of the season, NJ.com's award-winning staff of reporters and photojournalists put you in the middle of the action for in-depth coverage of all these semifinals around New Jersey, including photo galleries, recaps, and stats. Be sure to visit NJ.com/HS Sports. And we'll also be broadcasting some more games this weekend. And I know that I'm going to be in Ramsey for the big one with Bergen Catholic versus Don Bosco Prep. You could check in on NJ.com, and you'll have all the links to watch those games live and on demand as an NJ.com subscriber. So I'd like to thank my cohorts in Donovan Hugel, Ryan Patty, Joe Zadalis, Mike Kinney, Kevin Minnick, and Bill Evans for getting us absolutely ready to get kicked off here for this semifinal weekend. So for all those guys here, I'm Dan Long saying so long, and we'll catch you next weekend here on the Jersey Blitz. Take care, everybody.